All right, now that I've got a background, I've got a texture, I've tweaked the little overlap that I need. Now I just want to go through and I want to understand what each of my layers is doing. So there's my text vector outlines. They're black. This is, I have layer styles on them, which is turning them kind of greenish. And so I can turn off those effects if I want to, or I can just turn them on selectively. So it's that inner shadow is kind of keeping it nice and dark. The color overlay, I don't think that hurts. The outer glow is actually kind of helpful, but the drop shadow is where the blues come from. And I don't mind them, but I think I want to lessen it now that I have kind of a greenish background. So I can take that drop shadow, I'm going to take its opacity down. Maybe to about 25. Yeah, now I think that's helpful. Anything else? I don't love how that little corner is touching. It's called a tangency in design with that. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit more severely. Cut it out there, and now I'm going to just take this little section and then transform it just so slightly, just with the skew tool, and just push it out a little bit like so. That might have been too much though. Let's see, let's do it with warp so I can hopefully isolate this. There we go. The beauty of digital artwork is that you have control of all these different aspects, or you at least hope you do. Then I'm also going to erase it right where this glow is, so that doesn't interfere. Very nice. There's a lot of little close connections here. With the line work here going behind the leaf, I can erase that out too. And going on top of the leaf here. So quality checking. Before you submit, before you print. This is probably our most complicated project so far, using vector and raster imaging together in one image. I'm just going to take that M, transform it just slightly smaller. Rotate it a little bit, grow it a little bit. And you see it's separate from its coloring behind it, and that's okay. I'm going to fix that coloring, but that's in a different layer. All right, so now I want to find my text color. There it is. And now I just move that little bit. So now we're done with kind of the experimentation, and now it's the refining and getting everything where we want it. And we have so many different layers doing so many different things for this. Photoshop's fighting me a little bit. It's kind of slow, but I'll get there. Just want to rotate it and move it in underneath. There we go. All right. Now those color holds right here, they're feeling a little strong in some places and not strong enough in others. It feels like I've lost some aspects. So I'm going to use my eraser at a low opacity, very soft. Dampen those a bit where they're a little maybe too strong. And then I want to put those highlights back into the eyes. I don't know how I lost them. Of my hamster. Oh, I know why. Because this needs to go on top of those fonts. There we go. Yeah, that's working better. Now those eyes look a little too much, so I'll take them down a tiny bit. There we go. Nice. So you might think that we're all done, but of course not. Right? I'm going to mark this color hole just so I don't lose track of it again. If anything I wanted to paint over the top of everything, it would go right on there. I might even mark that a different color. Okay, so I understand where everything is. I understand why certain layers are turned off. Take the opacity down a little bit on the outlines of my spot illustration. That looks good. Now, I don't need all of these background colors turned on. But if I wanted to see how they looked, like how does yellow look with that texture, I can, much more subtle. And if I want this green to be a little bit more yellow, I could always play with this opacity. So many options. So there's one other thing we can do. If we still feel like this is just a little too clean looking and we want to prepare it for printing, the thing I want to teach you now is how to color separate. When you move files from Illustrator, their default format is what's called CMYK format. But this is RGB format, which shows millions of colors, which looks very pretty and will print very well. But if I want to get it ready for professional production on a lithograph press, I have to make sure it will work well with just CMYK inks. And so what I might do, let me save it first before I show you all this. What I might do is save it and then change its mode from RGB to CMYK mode. And that will shift my colors somewhat, because CMYK is what can be printed with cyan, yellow, magenta, CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink. And then we can kind of embrace that limitation and actually use it to make it more interesting. This is taking a long time to save. Here we go. So what that looks like is going to image mode and then changing it to CMYK. And in order to do that, I can rasterize my smart objects if I want to, but I'm not going to. And I can flatten it if I want to, which would save a lot of space, but I don't want to flatten it, not yet. And then there are different printer profiles, but I'm just using the default. And basically, sending it to different lithographs, you see how my greens became a little bit grayer there. And now it's in CMYK mode. But now this allows me to see, this will show up next to layers, or you can go to window and see channels here. In channels, it will allow me to see what these different layers are doing. So that's what my blacks are doing. I don't have much black ink in this print. In fact, I don't have anything that's 100% black ink. It gets darkest here around my banner and around my lettering, but it never goes to 100% black ink. If I combine those blacks with the yellows, it looks like this. Right? If I combine those blacks and yellows with magenta, it looks like this. And if I combine the cyan, magenta, yellows, and blacks, it's full color. What if it's just cyan and yellows? Looks like that. What if it's just cyan and black? Looks like that. So on and on. What if it's just cyan and magenta and black? Looks like that. What about just cyan and magenta? So your image is always layered up of these 4 inks in professional printing: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. The problem is an ink, when it's printed, cannot be printed like you see here in just a solid gradation. Instead, this is taking the magenta layer, for instance. And when you isolate just one layer, it's going to show it to you in grayscale. Instead, it has to do it in what's called a bitmap mode. So first I'm going to change it to grayscale. I'm going to rasterize. I'm going to flatten just for this example. And I'm going to show you how we can separate out the colors. So if I was going to make a t-shirt film work for my magenta ink, I first isolate the magenta channel, turn all the other channels off, especially the combined channel. Okay, and that gives me just the grayscale for what the magentas are doing. And then I would go to image mode. I've converted it to grayscale, and then I can go to bitmap. Okay, and I can choose what output I want. And I can say, okay, I want an output of 300 pixels per inch, which is what I usually do, because that's the production standard for printing. And I want to use what's called a halftone screen. That's my favorite mechanical way of printing. And then for magenta, I have to choose what frequency. And the frequency for magenta, the frequency is how many dots of magenta ink do I want per inch. And so 20 is a pretty low frequency. It's going to be pretty big dots, but that helps me see it. So that's fine. But now the angle, this is what I need you to actually know to understand printing. This is good for your final exam as well. You have to print the different color inks at different angles, otherwise they just all layer on top of each other. So let me show you what that looks like. And I'll actually use print production books to remind me of this. But all the inks should be at least 15 degrees separated from each other. And the only ink that's always printed at 45 degrees is black. So I don't want to print magenta at the default 45 degrees, otherwise it will just overlap with the black ink exactly, and I won't see any color. So let me find an image that kind of shows this to you. Very quick, just about coloring and CMYK separations. All right, so these are CMYK dots. And from a distance, they make a very clear image. And I'll do this on my own work to make something look retro. And I have actions that do this. But up close, this is what they're doing. They're separating all those millions of colors into just 4 colors that are overlapped on each other. And this is what old comics do, which is why they're very limited in color. And so I'll use it on my comic book characters. You can also use channels and separations to create kind of 3D effects, to create multiple layers of communication, just separate out the cyan channel from the magenta channel in that instance. You can see the dots in newspaper comics because the printing is only 150 dots per inch. But if you were to use a magnifying glass on anything printed, you would see these different overlays of colored dots. Right? It's often used now, a halftone pattern separation, to make things look more retro, but it's actually how everything is professionally printed. So here, these are the different angles, because all those four inks, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, have to be printed at separate angles so that when they are printed together, they create what are called Gaussian roses. So what is the angle for magenta? 75 degrees here, 30 degrees different from black. So basically you want your colors to be 15 degrees different from each other. And you want your black layer to be 30 degrees from any of the color layers so that the black is nice and sharp.